morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now, late last night, I was up scouring the internet trying to find a lead story for today's episode, and it wasn't looking good because, true to form, September has been a very slow month. Not so much at the box office, as we've had some really solid hits this year, like No Good Deed, of course The Maze Runner, and The Equalizer looks very strong for this weekend. But movie news-wise, it's been slow. And then, sure enough, at the very last minute, I was saved by a comic book movie news story. And I think that speaks as to why the genre has become so important, not just to Hollywood, but to the entertainment media as well. Because think about it, before genre films, not just comic book films, but the Comic-Con topics that interest that group became such a big part of Hollywood, how much did you follow movie news? I mean, of course, there was an industry there because Tinseltown, industry insiders wanted to know what was going on around town, so that audience had to be served. And there were, of course, cinephiles, but nothing like today. And still, despite this increased interest, it doesn't exist across the board. It still is only with this genre type of movie, this kind of story. I mean, sometimes I report on other things, but it just simply does not get the same attention as this Comic-Con fair. So I think that's just fascinating when you consider it, and why you're not going to see this movie go away for this type of movie go away for a long time, because not only does Hollywood rely on it, but other businesses as well. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that merchandising and toys have found tremendous success from the rise of the blockbuster genre film. So fascinating. And for those of you who get a little tired of that, the other two stories today do not have to do with it. But then I was like, no one is going to watch this episode in terms of, search traffic. So what is the first story of the day? The anchor that makes the other two stories possible. Well, that's news that while X-Men Days of Future Past is coming out on DVD in October, DVD and Blu-ray, and you can, I believe, get it on streaming right now. I think it's available on Google Play right now. Next year, in 2015, you can pay even more to buy the whole movie again, but this time with 10 extra minutes. Who would do that? Well, wait till you hear who's in the extra 10 minutes. It's Rogue, and they're actually calling it the Rogue Cut, which I think is pretty brilliant marketing, because for all those Rogue fans out there like myself, we're very eager to see what they did with the character, because X-Men Days of Future Past was such a refreshing return to form for the franchise as a whole that I think a lot of us were hoping to see Rogue finally done justice. And I think Anna Paquin has evolved a lot as an actress herself, from being that person who we all thought was miscast in the first place, through her, to someone who, through her work with True Blood, has become actually, I think, a pretty darn good choice for Rogue. A much more powerful actress who has a lot of experience playing a spunky Southern belle. So they did shoot some scenes with her. She's not the whole 10 minutes. There are extra scenes for a number of characters, but you're going to see Rogue put back in the movie. And that's, I think, a pretty good carrot to get people to shell out extra money to buy this extra cut. Do I wish it was on the cut now? Kind of. Would I pay more money to get a super Blu-ray combo pack right now? I think I would prefer that. I think being asked to pay for the DVD or Blu-ray later, like months later, seems a little bit gimmicky to me. But again, that Rogue promise of Rogue is pretty tempting. I also think that the overall coverage for the DVD release, the Blu-ray release coming out in October, has been very strong. There's a great little featurette right now about how they did the Quicksilver sequence where he's running around the kitchen on the wall. I'll put a link to that in the video description. So it looks like they're going to have some really great bonus features on the DVD Blu-ray. But I'm just curious to what you guys think of the idea of having this extra cut, which is sold months later. Will you pay for it? Do you want to see Rogue that badly? And also, if Rogue is so popular, why didn't they just put her in the actual film? The claim is that she kind of took things off track. It was just too many different plot lines. But still, I think a lot of us would have really liked to have seen her in the movie. And I worry that maybe because they're going back in time now almost permanently with Apocalypse, that Anna Paquin will never get her chance. But in 2015, we can see how she would have done if she'd been allowed to continue with the role. So that's the first story of the day. Popularity of Rogue, and also how extras and, this intense interest in genre filmmaking and, behind the scenes is allowing Hollywood to, upmarket, upsell, I guess. Upsell is the right term. Upsell you on your favorite movies. All right, so what's the second story of the day? Well, a number of you have been calling to my attention Ted 2 and the cast that it's putting together? Well, they finally got enough big cast members that I think it's worth discussing. I think Ted 2 will be very interesting considering what happened with A Million Ways to Die in the West. I'm very curious to see what that did to Seth MacFarlane's reputation. But apparently it hasn't hurt him when it comes to signing on big names for his next movie. He had, quite the ensemble cast in A Million Ways to Die in the West, and he's continuing that with Ted 2. It's something he's also done to great effect on Family Guy with a lot of great guest stars. So who's joining? Well, Liam Neeson, who I found quite disturbing in A Million Ways to Die in the West. I was like, Liam Neeson doesn't attempt to rape people, but, apparently Seth MacFarlane disagrees with me on that point. But Liam Neeson's going to return for Ted 2. Morgan Freeman, who of course is ubiquitous at this point, he's everywhere. He's going to, jump in there and collect a paycheck and talk to Ted. And then another very interesting casting choice that spurred me to discuss this was John Slattery. He's going to also join the cast, and he's Roger Sterling on Mad Men. Fantastic actor. I think doesn't get enough credit for what he contributes to Mad Men, and I think he's a very good choice for Seth MacFarlane and company. So that's how this picture's coming together. Of course, Mark Wahlberg still stars. Seth MacFarlane is resuming his role as Ted. He's going back behind the camera. And then also Amanda Seyfried's coming on to really take over for Mila Kunis, which I think is also an interesting development. But Ted, the first Ted, made so much money, it'll be interesting to see if A Million Ways to Die in the West has done any damage. I'm curious to how you feel. Do you want to revisit Ted and company? Do you feel that A Million Ways to Die in the West has soured you a little bit on Seth MacFarlane? Or if he goes back behind the camera and to just doing, the animation, the motion capture for Ted, are you okay with that? And what do you think of all these actors signing on? Do you think it's the smart move, or do you think they should have paid attention to what happened with A Million Ways to Die in the West? Although I guess a paycheck's a paycheck, and A Million Ways to Die in the West didn't really hurt anyone's career besides Seth MacFarlane's. So that's the second story of the day. Now the third story of the day is a fun little business story, and it speaks to the, Hollywood, when we're talking about what's going on with Hollywood, how it's changing. We just talked about genre filmmaking, but now the global box office is starting to have an effect as well. We talk all the time about what's happening with Asia and that influence, but now Russia is trying to see what maybe their increased box office can do for them, and they have some very interesting options they're putting on the table. Now, you might have noticed, and I've certainly noticed, that it's becoming popular again to have Russians as your villains in a film. We had some evil KGB people bothering Black Widow and the Avengers. Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit really went after the Russians. A Good Day to Die Hard, the Russians were the villains. If you go and see The Equalizer this weekend, he's fighting the Russians. For a while, they were our friends. Although I guess maybe The Man from U.N.C.L.E. might help, smooth things over a little bit next year. That's where an American and a Russian team up to save the world. That'll be Henry Cavill as the Russian. Henry Cavill is the American, and Armie Hammer as the Russian. That looks pretty good. We haven't really seen much of it yet. But overall, the Russians are pretty unhappy with the way they're being depicted in Hollywood. So they're like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't even show these movies here, because why should we, play a film to our own countrymen, our citizens and our, supposed voters, that makes us look bad, that makes the country look bad. It's just not cool. So they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't show those. And when they started to think about that, they started to think, well, hey, we're not too happy about the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia. Maybe we should limit Hollywood films in general, so that Hollywood, in turn, will exert pressure on Washington, because we know they have a close relationship, and maybe get our sanctions removed. Whoa! I think that is some very wishful thinking from Russia. And while Hollywood, of course, is very friendly with Washington, I think that's more in terms of their donations and who they give money to, and, going to all these fundraisers, and, also being a carrot for, talk about carrots, you want to buy the X-Men extra DVD Blu-ray because Roe will be on it, and someone wants to buy a big expensive dinner ticket to go support a politician because they can go and meet a celebrity. That's kind of, the incentive system that's worked out, and why Hollywood and Washington get along so well. And I guess maybe there's some influence, but I think to change the policy that we have with Russia, especially considering this isn't just like, well, we don't like Russia kind of thing. It's like Russia is misbehaving, at least as far as America's concerned. So that's where those sanctions are coming from. So I don't think that Hollywood, I would hope, would even dare try to get involved with that. But would they? Because there's quite a lot of money on the table here. Russia's box office, like China's, is growing exponentially. They were at 1.3 billion, I believe, or up 1.3 billion, some huge number there in 2013. And 75% of the money that's made over there at the movies is with American films. So there is a lot of money to lose here. So I'm curious to what you think of this. What do you think of Hollywood and movies becoming maybe a gambling chip across the globe and used in politics and the way countries deal with each other, holding our movies, for ransom almost, the Hollywood box office money there. Do you think Hollywood would dare try and interfere at that level? And also, what do you think of Russians becoming the popular villains these days? Do you think they're a good choice, or is it too old school? Been there, done that. Just a very interesting development in general. And, as you know from our dealings with China, we have some difficulty over there as well. But it's more about everybody wants the money for themselves and not so much politics. Although some people don't, have said they don't like supporting the Chinese economy so much through Hollywood and other endeavors, considering that it's still a communist country. And, Russia's not so great either on their track record with how they treat their people. But what do you think? As all these global opportunities arise, especially for Hollywood, is Hollywood wrong to try and capitalize on them? All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from BioCube789. And BioCube says, "Hey Grace, Rob here from Canada. Hi Rob. Love your show. I watch it every day. I do have a question that is kind of a 2-parter. It's not really a 2-parter, I think. I think it can be answered pretty succinctly. At least I'm going to try to, because it's a big scoping question, but I'm going to try and give you the nitty-gritty of it. But anyway, Rob says, I've always been interested in how an idea for a film or TV show makes its way to the screen. My question is, how do you pitch a TV or film idea? And what do you need for the pitch to make it successful? You don't need to answer on MMN. I am, but I would love some of your insight. Thank you so much, and keep up the amazing work." Thank you, BioCube. Great question. I appreciate the kind words, and it's a very complicated one. So I'm going to give you kind of the crash course in pitching in Hollywood. Now, it's almost impossible to pitch anybody in Hollywood unless you have some kind of representation. You can either be a manager or an agent, or even if you're just friends with the producer. But, you need 2 sticks to rub together to start a fire. You can't do it on your own. There are some ways you can do it if you're totally out there by yourself and you don't know anybody and you don't think you're going to know anybody in the near future. For instance, an accountant recently at one of the top agencies was able to transition to a writer that's represented by the agency because he was popular there. He made friends, and he told some of the junior agencies, like, "Hey, I'm an aspiring writer," and they read his stuff. And then when an agent was promoted and needed a client, bam, they picked this guy up from the accounting department. So that's one way to go in. You can try interning. It's tricky, though. It's tricky, because there's a lot of potential lawsuits there. It's very hard to get others to read your work. So be careful and realize this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you can get it through an internship or a job. Another way to get it is through contests. There's like the Nichols Fellowship over that the Academy runs for screenwriting. Disney has a very intense screenwriting program, which has been feeding screenwriters into their Marvel films, actually. The co-writer with James Gunn on Guardians of the Galaxy came from that program. So that's something that you can do. And then, of course, a great way to get noticed is to study this in school. You can go to study screenwriting. For instance, the big schools out in LA, UCLA and USC, they have a very good relationship with the Hollywood agencies, and they often look for talent from that pool. So that's one way to go. So now, let's say you have an agent or a producer. Now, this is the way it will work. Today, and the way the Hollywood has evolved, the studios aren't so much in charge as they used to be. The studio system is gone. So instead, the agencies have almost taken their place. So let's say you have an agent or a manager. You'll go to them and you say, "I've been thinking of this idea." Now, often you'll get your work because they've come up with an idea, or an actor's come up with an idea, or a producer's come up with an idea, and they need a writer for hire. So they'll go out to their pool of writers that they represent and say, "Hey, do you want this gig, or we think you'd be a good fit? Or why don't you pitch for it and we'll pick the best person?" So sometimes it's not your pitch. You're pitching for an idea that someone else is looking to hire for. So that often is the way you get your start in any writing field, comic books as well. It's original work rarely starts out. Now, of course, as a side note, you could always go the independent film route. That's very tricky, and the festivals have become very political and very much engaged with the agencies as well. You'll find when you look at lineups at festivals these days, you're like, hey, everybody here already has a career. They're just trying to do something different, and they're using the festivals to do it. So that day of the truly independent film might somewhat be over. And I think even if you look at someone like Damien Chazelle, seemingly coming out of nowhere, well, he actually worked his way through the Sundance program. So that's another program you can join. Some of these festivals have programs where they also groom talent, and you can meet agents through that. So anyway, one is your pitch to do someone else's idea. The other thing is you go to your agent, your manager, and you say, I have an idea. I want to make a movie, and this is what I'm thinking of. So instead of them taking it to the studio, they package it in-house at the agency. They get one of their directors, some of their named talents, they put it all on your project, and then before you even write a script, they go and they say, hey, Warner Brothers, hey, Disney, hey, Fox, are you interested in this film? Sometimes they won't even go to the studio. Sometimes they'll go to a production company, like one of the big producers, like Legendary, Joel Silver, Scott Rudin, and say, hey, do you want to make this movie? And that producer already has a distribution deal with the studio. So they just go, hey, I'm making this movie, and Fox or Paramount, whatever, goes, okay, you have a deal and we trust your judgment. Or, you know, they'll look at it, but, you know, go pretty smoothly. So that's one way for it to work. Then there's the situation where you've written a spec script. Well, then that, you know, there used to be a time in Hollywood where spec scripts were really a big deal. And everyone wrote spec scripts. That's how movies got made. But these days, because Hollywood's becoming more and more risk averse, and they're really adapting more properties than they are doing original films, that isn't really the case anymore. Spec scripts are more, you know, you have to have a few to get an agent to show examples of your work, but now the deals are really put in place and then you begin doing the writing. So that's the way it works. But spec scripts used to be a big deal, but still they're used sometimes. So you have your original script, you hope that nobody rips you off, and you throw it around Hollywood, and you know your agent or your manager will take it again to producers or to the studio or to their actors and say, hey, do you want to sign on to this? Because it's really hard for, you know, again, being risk averse, Hollywood likes to know that someone else thinks this is a good idea. So that if an actor is like, well, I really want to play this role, they go, okay, now I feel a little better about it. Or if this director says, this is my next movie, they go, okay, now I feel a little better about it, etc. So you really kind of have to get a team together to really get anywhere. Hollywood is very much a team business. That's why it's so political, and it's hard to really do anything on your own. Even when you're an independent filmmaker, that has its own web. So that's really how you get a film off the ground. It's, you know, I hope it hasn't discouraged anybody, but I always think it's important that when you're trying to achieve something, you're realistic about the steps you need to take to get there. So again, if you're thinking of becoming a screenwriter and you want to get to the stage where you can turn to your agent or manager and say, hey, I have an idea, or they turn to you and say, I want to pitch for this, Go study screenwriting at one of these programs, either it be a school or a film festival or a fellowship through Disney or the Academy, etc. That's a great inroad because they don't really take submissions anymore. Or you can always try and make an independent film, but again, that's really hard to do as well. So that's my answer to your question, Rob. I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much for asking. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.